Rioters in Indonesia have ransacked the homes of lawmakers as protests spiralled into the country's worst crisis since the president took office a year ago. Now, the unrest, which has left at least 6 people dead and hundreds injured, began over unemployment and inflation, but escalated after police allegedly killed a motorcycle taxi driver. Joining us now is Greg Barton, Deakin University Global Islamic Politics Chair. Greg Barton, thank you so much for your time. Look, I understand the protests have been paused after the government imposed increased security measures, but can you talk to us about what was driving them?
Gab, these protests began last Monday and they were pretty peaceful up until that incident Thursday night when an armoured police vehicle drove through a crowd and unfortunately knocked down a motorcycle taxi delivery food driver, killing him. And then everything sort of broke loose and we saw violence and unfortunately fires and more deaths. It now seems to have turned a corner. These protests were driven by concerns about cost of living and a sense that the national parliament was indifferent. A particular point that sparked protests was that parliamentarians, the 580 members of the national parliament, awarded themselves a $3,000 housing allowance each month on top of a fairly generous salary. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. But the middle class is doing it tough in Indonesia. They pay the bulk of income tax. It's a fairly new thing in Indonesia to have income tax. And young people face very high youth unemployment, particularly for professional graduates. So students are very agitated and upset.
How unusual is it to have protests escalate to this point in Indonesia?
Well, Indonesia is a free society, a free democracy, not a perfect democracy. So protests are quite common. They're normally peaceful. The level of violence we're seeing is really disturbing. People are working from home this week just out of an abundance of caution. It was that incident Thursday night when that armoured police vehicle drove through the crowd that triggered the deterioration. The president made announcements Sunday evening, made a series of concessions, withdrew that housing allowance for MPs. Hopefully that's enough to have de-escalated things, but there are underlying grievances, and it's unusual to see this level of violence, but the underlying grievances have been building for years.
As you say, the president had agreed to scrap back some of the perks that protesters were targeting, so including the lawmakers' generous housing allowances. So do you expect that the worst is over, or could they start back up again?
Yeah, as of Tuesday morning here in Bandung, Indonesia, it does seem like the worst is over. But as we saw Thursday night, all it takes is somebody to make a mistake to panic. I don't think anyone wants violence, but in that panicking, bad things can happen. So it could spiral up again. But I think everyone's cautiously hopeful. The president's been visiting injured members of the public, protesters in hospital, visited the family of that motorcycle delivery driver, has called for prosecution of the police involved. He's saying and doing the right things so far. This is the first real test of his not yet 1-year-old presidency. So it looks as if the conditions to restore order are in place, but we just have to hope we get through the next day or two without anything sparking it into another spiral.
Okay, finally, Greg Barton, while I have you, I want to talk to you about Iran. A small number of diplomats remain in Iran's embassy because Australia needs some contact with the Islamic regime, according to a senior government minister. Now, of course, the government expelled Iran's diplomats after it was revealed the country had orchestrated attacks right here on Australian soil. Can I get your assessment of, I suppose, the action by the Albanese government and where to from here?
Well, the Albanese government, I think, has done what many people were saying had to be done. There's no question the Revolutionary Guards Corps, the group behind the Iranian regime at the very top of power, controlling the economy, running a police state. This is a terrorist group in terms of running proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas, but also overseas operations, including what we saw in Australia. But the Albanese government's in a tough spot. It wants to thread the needle. We've got 4,000 Australians living, working in Iran. They can't easily leave quickly. They need consular assistance. So we need to keep channels of communication open. But when you declare a group a terrorist group, that prohibits you from communicating with them. So we have to work with other elements of the regime that are not technically Revolutionary Guard Corps members and try and strike a compromise. It's really a difficult thing to do, and that's why it's taken years to come to this point.
Greg Barton, Deakin University Global Islamic Politics Chair, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.